to introduce our And now, without further ado, I am proud to introduce our speaker, Bob Waters. Bob Waters is the owner of Peak Business Management and authorized training partner, ATP organization with PMI. She is a senior technical instructor for Skillsoft, the leader in corporate learning, serving over 65% of Fortune 500 organizations. Barb has served as a reviewer for several editions of the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK Guide and Standards for Project Management. Barb serves the 11 campuses of Colorado Mountain College, providing instruction and mentorship to future project leaders. She also provides guidance and insight to organizations that are navigating the rapidly changing landscape of project management. Ms. Waters holds a master's degree in business administration. She has over 25 years of experience managing projects within government entities, as well as the private sector. She worked for the first US company to win the prestigious Deming Prize for Total Quality Management, TQM. Through Peak and the PMI ATP program, Barb has formed a network of relationships with PMI chapter instructors and learners. Her team has created a personalized student journey that ensures preparation and confidence for exam day. So without further ado, once again, welcome Barb Waters.
Thank you, Chantel, and thank you so much, everybody. It's great to be part of your PM Symposium this year and to tell you all about the PMBOK Guide 7th edition. This was a long-awaited publication. As many of you know, it was supposed to come out in 2020, and we did see it released July 1st. And so I've had an opportunity to not only get a little bit of a sneak preview of the guide, because I was one of the reviewers for this guide, but also to now take a deep dive and tell you everything you need to know about the PMBOK Guide 7th edition. So thank you very much. We are going to start with a little quiz question right off the top. So let's talk about the PMBOK Guide 7th edition and how it relates to the PMP exam. So I'm going to quiz you if you don't mind participating in this. How many of you feel like the PMBOK Guide is the driver of PMP exam prep change or exam changes? And should we see an exam change now that the PMBOK Guide 7th edition has been released? So just a quick question if you want to chat in your thoughts on that. How closely are these two things tied, the PMBOK Guide and the PMP? You might be surprised to learn that actually, even though the PMBOK Guide has been released, the exam hasn't changed. And that might be surprising to a lot of you to say, wait a minute, shouldn't we be taking the PMP 7th edition now? And actually, the answer is no. The PMBOK Guide is on a cycle of changes that happen every, I'd say 3 years or so. The PMP exam is on its own cycle. It just so happens that because the PMP exam change was a little bit delayed and the PMBOK Guide was too, that these two cycles coincidentally kind of happen close to one another, which would make us think that they're tied, and they aren't. So actually, the PMP exam did not change with the release of the PMBOK Guide, 7th edition. The PMP updates happen they're tied to something different. We'll talk about what they're tied to. The PMBOK Guide was updated as it normally is in its cycle of every 3 or so years, and we'll talk about how that works. PMP exam is tied to something called the PMP role delineation study. And some of you may have actually taken a survey from PMI sometime in your career. This is conducted every 5 to 7 years. And the last one was just completed in 2019. So believe it or not, we're actually early in this cycle of a PMP exam change. And as part of an authorized training partner network, I assure you that the PMP exam is not only not tied to the PMBOK 7th edition, it's still tied to the 6th edition, and it's purposeful. We'll talk about why that is today. And I do see some great chats happening here already. Wait a minute, this test needs to reflect the new processes, and I'll explain what those are and what's happened to what we used to know about the inputs and tools and techniques and outputs of the PMBOK 6th edition. So we'll talk about that. But we don't expect this PMP exam to change, at least not in the near future. PMI will follow its normal cadence. Now, sometimes we'll see exams update to have more of a common vocabulary, little tiny tweaks here and there, but a full exam change just happened in January of 2021, and it was in line with this normal flow of exam changes. So that's why it's not tied to PMBOK updates. The PMP is actually not tied directly to the PMBOK. It is tied to this reference list that's published by PMI. This reference list is 10 different books, the PMBOK Guide 6th edition being only one of them. We tell our students if they want to know what they should read. First of all the content that PMI provides for exam prep is what we really use for exam prep resources. And then the two books that are really most tied to the PMP would be the Agile Practice Guide and the previous version of the PMBOK Guide. Does anybody want to guess how many pages there are if we take these books and put them cover to cover? If anybody has ever heard of this or seen our blog about it, it is a lot. Yeah. So cover to cover, David's closest right now with 4,000. It's higher than that. It's actually just over 5,000 pages. And so anybody who wants to study for the PMP wouldn't really read this list of books cover to cover. They would work with a training provider. So, oh, I almost gave it away on the next slide. Does anybody know what year the first PMBOK guide was published? Do you know what year the first one was published? So here we are in 2021. We have the 7th edition of the PMBOK Guide. Again, David with 1997. You are so close, very close. You're within a year. Nicely done. And that was 1996. Yeah, so this was the first guide. Notice that on the cover of the first guide of the PMBOK Guide, it didn't say first edition. Maybe they didn't know where the things were going to head, and that just this many years later, we're in the 7th edition. So we've come a long way from that first PMBOK Guide. With this latest edition of the PMBOK Guide, PMI has also established 10 additional languages. So English plus 10 additional languages for this publication. It is available for free, no charge to PMI members. You can get the PMBOK Guide 7th as well as the 6th edition. I'll explain why 2 editions would be available at the same time. We'll talk about that in a little bit. When PMI decided that they were going to create a new edition of the PMBOK Guide, they really took our feedback to heart. And some of the feedback they were getting over the years from all of the previous versions were things like, we need the PMBOK Guide to better align with how we work today. You've given us 49 processes and told us to follow them from inputs to outputs and in a very prescriptive fashion, but really our projects don't work exactly like that. Other feedback included that our team needs help delivering outcomes, not just deliverables or output, but real value in our outcomes. We need to know that our customers really use what we're delivering and that it solves a problem or fulfills a need. We also need to be able to adapt quickly to changes in the market. We can't always go through a change control process that is so prescribed and time consuming. Sometimes we have to be able to pivot just a lot more quickly than that. And then finally, we need to choose an approach that's right for us. And that approach isn't always going to be predictive or plan driven project management. So, what about other approaches like adaptive or agile? What about hybrid? And help us to understand how those work. So, with the PMBOK Guide 7th edition, PMI has definitely listened to that feedback. And furthermore, in the preface of the PMBOK guide, so that those um, few pages that have Roman numerals at the front of any book before the actual page numbering begins, PMI acknowledged this and they said, right now we need to respond to things like artificial intelligence and cloud based capabilities, and the fact that teams don't necessarily all work together in one office and they may be distributed globally. So, the way organizations are shifting and team members can be located anywhere around the world, this creates this situation of permanent whitewater where we can't say anymore, let's just wait until things calm down. Let's wait until the pace slows down, and then we'll get back to our plan driven project. It just doesn't work that way. We live in a world that is evolving very rapidly. Technology is always a step ahead. So we need to stay up with it. And so PMI was responding to that as well. Okay, we have another quiz if you're ready for this one. Is the PMBOK guide the standard for project management, or is the PMBOK guide a separate publication from the standard for project management? Are they one and the same, or are they two different things? The standard for project management and the PMBOK guide. David, you're being brave here in the chat. That's great. Okay, so you're saying it's separate, that the standard is one thing, the PMBOK is another. Some of you think maybe, it is the standard. This has always been tricky, and it is actually two books in one. So if you look through the PMBOK guide from cover to cover, and we will do that in a moment, we'll have a peek inside. There are two separate publications with two different sets of page numbering going on in there. So we have the guide to the project management body of knowledge, and then we have the standard for project management. And another thing that's commonly misunderstood about the PMBOK guide, I know I misunderstood this when I was new to it. I always thought the PMBOK guide was the project management body of knowledge. After all, if you take the acronym PMBOK, it says project management body of knowledge. But if you read the full title, it is actually a guide to the project management body of knowledge. So the project management body of knowledge is everything we've ever learned about project management, best practices that we've come up with over the years. It's in your own head and your experience. It's in my head. It's all of us that are subject matter experts. We all make up the body of knowledge. And the PMBOK guide simply steers us and tells us how to best use the body of knowledge. So that's a little bit of a subtle thing about the PMBOK guide's title and what it really means. Now, if I want to stop right now and just say, if you have any questions, please I'm watching the chat right now. If you have any questions, jump right in. And in the interest of time, I'll keep moving ahead, but I'm keeping an eye on that chat just in case there's anything about these slides that you want to know a little bit more about. So let's take a look inside. We have the preface, which I had mentioned includes PMI's story and their position about why the PMBOK changed and how they are adapting to match reality and what's happening with all of us on our jobs. And then it includes tables of contents. That's actually plural on purpose. It's a table of contents for each, the PMBOK and the standard. So we have the standard for project management, which is only really 59 pages, and then a reference, a little block of pages for reference and index. Then we have the PMBOK guide, followed by a very large section of references and the appendix. The PMBOK guide has always had a pretty big section in the back for references. Does this number of pages surprise anybody? When you see the PMBOK guide 7th edition has 195 pages of content in it, does anybody have their PMBOK 6th or 5th hanging around that you can kind of look at next to you or near your desk? That yes, it's very small compared to the 6th. Yes, and I'll explain why that is. And that the PMBOK guide is not only a publication these days, there's actually a digital element that PMI keeps for us as well. And so we'll talk about how the physical book and the digital element go hand in hand. We'll look at that. So, a standard for project management includes the introduction, a system for value delivery, and the project management principles. So, a standard is more about our mindset. It's not really tactical, meaning that it's not the tools and the techniques and the things we're used to seeing in a PMBOK guide. Yeah, no, the font is not bad. And they didn't do that other thing that they did in the 6th edition where they put those tiny little dots so that it was difficult to copy. That was hard on the eyes. This version is a lot cleaner and easier to read. It doesn't have all of that page per, I don't know what you call that, but they had little pixels all over it. Yeah, this is a kind of a happy guide. It's an easier read. It's not so technical. And so the standard for project management, which is half of this book, it's its own publication. It's about our mindset, things that guide our behavior and the values of managing projects. The standard is really focused on this system for value delivery and explaining that, you know, it's not just activities and outputs. We were so focused on those in the 6th edition. Inputs, tools and techniques, outputs, check the box, we're done. Well, we're not done because there's often this gap between us checking the box and saying we're done and value, real value from the customer's point of view. So, in the context of the project environment, which could mean within our organization and the way we're structured and our internal organizational culture, as well as where we're trying to perform our projects in the external environment, we're trying to deliver value. And that can be very difficult when our environment is shifting. So it's like aiming at a moving target and trying to deliver value at the same time. So it gives us some great tools for doing that. Well, the PMBOK guide does. The principles that the standard is based on, there are a dozen, and I won't read them to you in the interest of time, but if you want to take a screenshot or the PDF of this is also available after the presentation, that might be a good time to kind of take a deeper look at each of these principles. And then we're going to go to the PMBOK guide and what it is comprised of. So we've got the introduction, something called project performance domains, tailoring, and then models, methods, and artifacts. So when we look at the project performance domains, they're like pieces of a puzzle that have to work well together for our project to be successful. We have stakeholder, the team, stakeholders meaning internal, external, the team, which would really be focused on leadership and engaging your team members and high performing teams. Development approach. Are we going to be predictive, adaptive, hybrid? Planning is a big part of it. No matter what type of project approach you have, planning fits in there somewhere. We're either going to be very plan driven or we adapt the plan as we go. Project work. So this is focused on our activities and making sure they align with strategic objectives. Delivery, and this is not only the deliverable, but the value piece. Measurement or metrics, and then uncertainty. Now, you might be used to seeing the knowledge areas from the 6th edition, things like scope, time, cost, quality, risk, and all of that. This is a different approach because projects, they're all different and the context can vary. So PMI is trying to set the stage for you to understand your project environment first, then your team structure, and finally, you'll choose the tools that will help you get the job done. Now, I'm not going to read the next series of slides to you because it's a deeper dive into each performance domain. And in the interest of time, though, it's helpful for you to have it. So each of these domains is explained in more detail, and there are 8 of them. So if you wanted to take a look and just see, okay, what do they mean by project work? And then it'll explain each of the domains in detail. But what we're going to do is skip ahead a little bit just so that you have these slides, but we'll keep talking about the next topic, which is those models, methods, and artifacts. This is my favorite part of the new PMBOK guide. At first, I was really unsure about it. Like, I don't know about this. And then I realized I wasn't using it correctly. Now that I know how to use it, I want to share with you how to use it. And I think you might like what you see. So let's talk about models first. PMI is just going to introduce you to a bunch of different options or models that would be like a tool belt or a technique belt. So you can choose which one works for your situation. So if my organization was going through change and I want to get all of my team members on board and have them help us to engage and to really be on the same page and create a successful project around change, here is an example of a model that's available that we could choose. Cotter's 8-step process for leading change. So this is one of many models that I could choose from. And so can you. This is just just a snapshot of the available models and the types of models that you can choose from. So if change is our focus, there are 4 different options, and it also tells us how they intersect with the performance domains. So if I'm trying to use a change model to engage my stakeholders, then Cotter's is going to help me get there, or it could be one possible way of getting there. Planning and project work also intersect. And so which models should we use for the situation we're in? Maybe team development is my focus. And if that's the case, then I'm going to be looking at something like maybe the Tuckman ladder, which probably many of you are familiar with if you've been a candidate for the PMP. So models, notice back here we have models, artifacts, and methods. So let's look at the next thing, which is methods. Methods are a way of achieving an outcome. So it's a way of doing something like estimating. And if I want to learn how to estimate, an estimating method like analogous estimating might be one of the options I can choose from. If you go to the PMBOK guide, you'll see many methods, not just this snapshot, but much more than this screenshot. But here's analogous estimating intersecting with the planning performance domain. But maybe that's not the right tool for our job. If we are going to take an adaptive approach and we want to use a more agile tool for estimating, maybe instead we choose story point estimation or relative estimating. So this isn't intended to teach you everything you need to know about analogous estimating. From here, you'll go outside of the PMBOK guide and I'll show you where you would reference and learn more about these methods and models. Okay, from here, we'll go to artifacts. An artifact can be a template, a document, output. So we sometimes think of these as organizational process assets or OPAs, but an artifact is anything we use or create during our project. So a burn down chart would be an example of an artifact that an agile team would be very likely to use to show their work across an iteration or a sprint. Or for some of you who aren't agile trained, at this point, that's okay. It's basically a 2-week time block, maybe 2 to 4 weeks time block of work. And they're just assessing how are we doing right now against the work we've pulled in for this couple weeks, kind of like you and your to-do list that you probably have on your phone. You know, how many things have I crossed off the to-do list that I had planned for today? All right, and then these are the artifacts that we can choose from. So we have visual data and information artifacts that intersect with the different performance domains. Now, the goal though, is to put it all together and apply it so we're successful with our projects. So using the PMBOK guide to drive or deliver outcomes is really what it's all about. So, if we were working in an industry where a lot of innovation is occurring and change is rapid, what do you think our development approach might be? Should we try to go with a plan and stick to the plan? And if change happens, we just have to go back and rework the plan? Should we try to go with more of an adaptive or agile approach to project management, depending on our environment? What do you think we should do? Or maybe hybrid, somewhere in the middle? And for those of you who maybe Agile is sort of still new, I'll give you an example of how Agile can even be applied in the construction industry. It might be unexpected. Does anybody in the group watch any of the home and garden TV shows, you know, flipping houses? They're doing a renovation. And we have the plan. You know, you think of construction as we better have a plan, stick to the plan. Oh, okay, Ross, thank you for speaking up. So this is your industry. Yeah. Right. We think about it as being plan driven. After all, we don't really want to invite the stakeholder or homeowner to come in once the project work is already underway and then say, how do you like it? And have them tell us, oh, well, I kind of like it, but if you could move the door over there and the window over there, like that does not apply well, right? Yeah, so you're waiting to hear it. In construction, we can absolutely take a hybrid approach and we can pull in agile practices where they make sense, and where they make the most sense is in the design phase. So if you're working closely with a stakeholder and you're modeling what the finished product will look like and you're asking for feedback, and at that stage if they say, oh no, I don't really like the way that looks, can you modify it? Sure, it's not a big deal. I have this program that we can do. It's meant for this. And we can have quick cycles of feedback and adjusting the plan, adapting the plan. We can be very agile in the design phase of construction. Hopefully we are, because the more feedback we collect then, the more likely the customer, the stakeholders are going to like the product we deliver. Now, of course, in construction, once we start to actually work with physical equipment and supplies and spending the money, we tend to be past the agile phase of that project and move more into a plan driven approach to the project. But we can still use agile in ways that are unexpected. So communication can be agile. We see that in Colorado with the Colorado Department of Transportation. One of the most plan driven things you can think of would be building a highway, right? But their entire stakeholder engagement plan and their signage, when they update signs for construction and do all of that, very agile. They are texting their stakeholders these days and doing things that are really meeting the needs because they've collected so much feedback about what the stakeholders want. So figuring out the approach we should take should really come first. If our organization is geographically distributed or dispersed, it might make sense for us to tailor our approach to our organization. We can then tailor at the project level and then implement ongoing improvements. So these are all ways that you can utilize the PMBOK guide to tailor your project. In the past, tailoring wasn't a big part of the PMBOK guide because it was so plan driven that we really just planned, executed to the plan, and that was how it worked. And it was prescribed for you. 49 processes. This is exactly how you follow them. Now it is an entire section dedicated to tailoring. So you select your initial development approach, figure out, first of all, what kind of environment are you in? Is it changing rapidly? Are you trying to innovate? If so, you probably want shorter feedback cycles, and you want to be able to pivot and adapt the plan more frequently. So that would make more sense. If you are in a well-known industry where the environment's very stable, things aren't changing, then maybe what worked before will work now, and you can take the predictive approach. So we tailor at each level of the organization and then the project. So you could even have teams within your organization that are taking different development approaches to their work because of the type of work they're doing. Do you ever have that? Just curious if you have agile teams in your organization, but overall, maybe the organization is still somewhat plan driven. That can happen too. So PMI acknowledges that and allows for that to happen, makes space for different approaches. I want to share something with you now. This is PMI standards, and this is actually a video I have embedded. But you can watch it on YouTube. I would recommend that. Sometimes when we try to stream video in a live Zoom, it can buffer for depending on our different internet speeds. So rather than trying to play it, if you find it on YouTube at YouTube, PMI Standards Plus Success at Your Fingertips, this is intended to go hand in hand with the PMBOK guides, both the 6th and 7th edition. And I want to bring it over so you can see how it works exactly. Now, remember that the PMBOK guide these days is really small. It doesn't have that many pages. So how is PMI going to work this out where we have all the answers at our fingertips without necessarily being able to read them all on the pages? I can see that it's thinking really hard right now. I'm not sure if I need to refresh. Let me see if we can get it moving. And if we can't, that's okay too. I'll be able to tap dance, no problem. It's funny, we just queued it up too. Right before this presentation, we had it ready to go. So let me see if I can just start it up again for everybody. And if I can't, that's okay. We're supposed to be able to go over to PMI Standards Plus. And when we're over there on the PMI website, we use it hand in hand with the PMBOK guide. And it is, let me see if this will work this time. I think it just timed out, that's all. Okay, when you're on the PMI.org website and you go to Standards and Publications, go to PMI Standards Plus. And you do have to be logged in. Sometimes PMI will prompt you to log in a second time, just to make sure that you are a member, because this is a member feature. Okay, it looks like they're actually having trouble on the Standards Plus website. They must have known I was going to be demoing it for you today. No problem. I'll tell you what's over there. It's really worthwhile, first of all. If you go to the Standards Plus, you'll see that you can still find the PMBOK 6th edition. You can find the process groups and the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs that everybody maybe didn't use, but some people really liked that prescriptive approach. It worked for them in their industry and they prefer it. So if your organization liked that prescriptive, 49 processes, you can still use it. It's still valid. And you are going to be able to find it in standards. Notice that again, the preface of the PMBOK guide says nothing in this edition of the PMBOK guide negates alignment with the process-based approach of past editions. So for the first time ever, we have two PMBOK guides that are both relevant, still in publication. The 6th edition is not retired. I don't know if that's a surprise to anybody. It surprised me when I read about it. So it is still here. You can still access these processes. You can also find templates on Standards Plus, and all of the tools that we mentioned are completely searchable. You can filter by industry. So if you want tools that are good for a healthcare organization trying to learn agile project management, you can filter for that, and Standards Plus will provide you results. It's a pretty cool website. Okay, so that is what happens to the process groups and the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs. Nothing, they're not going anywhere. We still have them. So we've got, where did the content go? The PMBOK Guide 6th edition and the models, methods, and artifacts that we find in the PMBOK 7th edition are in this digital platform. What's nice about the PMI Standards Plus is that PMI doesn't necessarily have to keep editing the PMBOK guide and saying, oh, we have this new tool. It really should have been in the PMBOK guide. We should probably do another edit of the PMBOK guide. They do that a lot. You know, the PMBOK guide 6th edition was published once, but then they continue to do reprints and corrections of it time and again. With PMI standards, they can bring in new tools. They can bring in new best practices. It becomes flexible and adaptable to change, which the PMBOK guide hasn't always been, you know, if you have 3 years or 4 years between publications. So did that surprise anybody to hear that we have the PMBOK guide 6th edition still around in addition to the 7th? I know for me, I was just like confused. How is that possible? Shouldn't it be retired? And yeah, so it's still out there. It's still relevant. I'm going to try to access standards again right now and see if it'll be friendly to me this time. I think it's looking better. Okay, I think it was having a hiccup, but now it has recovered. So standards it's still thinking and loading in this moment. Over here on the right, you'll see the PMBOK 7th edition. And here we have just interesting articles and blogs that are front page because they're fresh. But if we want to, we can go through the filters right now and we could say, you know, I want to know about construction. All right, let's give it a try. I'm going to be sad if we choose construction and adaptive and we don't get results after what I just said. So I'm going to choose those two in the filter and click apply. And now we have how to define scope for an agile construction project. What do you think about that, Ross? I think maybe there'll be some good articles out here. And then top risks in an agile project. So we have a lot that we can look for. Now, there aren't many, but that's okay. You're finding just what you need to know. We can clear those filters. And from here, what we can do is try something new. Let's look for adaptive in healthcare. And if anybody wants to be a driver here and tell me what to look for, I'd be happy to. And then we can click apply. When to use an iterative life cycle. Yeah, it's worth checking out. The other thing that you can do out here in standards is look for those PMBOK 6th plan driven. So if I want the ETOs, if that's really what is important to me and I want to search and find those, then I can. And here you have all the different ones and it'll tell us where it's finding this from. So for instance, here's the guide to business analysis. So it's not just the PMBOK guides out here. You'll find standards out here. BA is out here. Here's some 7th edition. But maybe I want an old process that I know existed in the PMBOK 6th. So identify stakeholders. And I want to find that particular process. I can look for it and it'll tell me exactly where it's pulling it from. So we've got PMBOK 7th edition, and if I keep scrolling, you'll eventually get to the 6th edition in here too. So it's all out there for your, you can browse, you can check it out. The other thing that's important though, is that this has been in beta for a while. I was able to kind of sample it and give some feedback, but it's still new. And so if you find that you want more and you can't find what you need, use this feedback button. Tell PMI what you're looking for. They do have a bunch of templates out here as well. So if you're looking specifically for templates, that's brand new. I know we used to have to go to projectmanagement.com to find our templates because we didn't necessarily find them when we were looking for them somewhere in PMI. We would find them on projectmanagement.com. Now PMI is pulling them into standards. So we've got weighted ranking. If we want to weight some options, it tells us how to do that. If we want an example of requirements documentation. So templates are a really new and very valuable thing that we'll find in standards. I'm so glad that worked. I was worried that we wouldn't get our little demo in today. So I'm happy that that worked. So a couple more things. I know we're getting very close to the top of the hour here. If you were curious and you just wanted to see what were the changes from the last PMBOK edition, the 6th edition to the 7th, this is a step-by-step, what changed, what's new, and it gives us an idea of where we're headed. So PMBOK Guide 6th edition, PMBOK Guide 7th edition, and definitely a key driver is that the 7th edition is not prescriptive any longer. We're looking at the idea that your project can fit in any context and you need the right tools for the right job. So that's where we are with the new PMBOK. Then a little bit about us, the Peak Trainer Network. We are an authorized training partner of the Project Management Institute. That means that any training we provide is going to be aligned to current exams and that each of us is vetted and badged with the particular content that we're training. So for all of us, that means PMP, DASM, and PMI chapter members never pay full price. So you do have these codes. I think Cynthia was going to share some information after the event about some of our upcoming dates. And I just want to say thank you again to everybody for this opportunity. It has been such a pleasure. And I think we have a little time for Q&A here. I'm pretty sure we do. And if we have any questions, I'm going to monitor the chat right now. Go ahead and what's on your mind? Do you have any questions about the PMBOK, the
Barb,
PMP?
we do want to do a final wrap up. Thank you so much for your
Yes,
presentation and
absolutely.
for your insightful presentation. And I think we've all learned a great deal about the standard for project management, table of contents, value delivery, project management principles, and the PMBOK guide, project performance domains, tailoring, models, methods, and artifacts, PMI standards plus platform. So now we would like to begin the Q&A portion of this session. And I'd like to make this very highly interactive. So we've unmuted participants so they can begin to ask questions directly. And then we'll also be monitoring the chat box as well.
Perfect. Thank
So
you so
participants,
much.
please begin asking your questions.
All right, here we go. Will any of the changes adjust renewing certificates in the future? Thank you for asking. This presentation is a little bit compressed for our time block, but when we teach the full presentation, no, there are no changes to renewing certifications. If you have a PMP, you are still in your 3-year cycle of earning 60 PDUs. The DASM has its same time frame as well. So no changes to certificate renewal, but you can report PDUs, of course, from learning about the changes. Any idea on the study prep needed for the bridging micro-credential for previous PMPs? So the micro-credential, the bridging, I think it is great. If you're talking about the PMI product, I think it is a PMI, just kind of introducing you to Agile. If you wanted to know a little bit more about Agile, we have a free PDU library that all chapter members are welcome to access. I can share that with Cynthia to relay to everybody as well. And we have videos on Scrum and Agile. I don't know how much that micro credential costs. If there's a charge for it, our PDUs can help you at no charge. But I think anytime you can bridge from the previous version to this one, it's a great idea, because this version changed more than any version has changed since probably the 3rd or 4th edition of the PMBOK guide. So, and you're asking specifically about PMPs. It's worth checking out, I would say, if PMI created it. If the PMP exam hasn't changed, how can the 7th edition PMBOK guide help with studying? It's not a resource. So if we go back, and I don't want to make everybody dizzy, but if we'll think back to that slide early on that showed the 10 books and cover to cover, 5,000 pages, it is not even a resource for the current PMP exam. The 7th edition is not a recommended read at this point in time. We recommend just really sticking to the PMI authorized content for the PMP, and maybe the Agile practice guide. First 3 chapters of the PMBOK guide are always a good read, really worth it. Yeah, I know, surprise, right? No PMBOK 7th edition to study for the PMP. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I really enjoy talking about it. I'm so glad the PMBOK 7th edition has arrived. We can all take a look. It's worth it. It's worthwhile as a read. Any other
And then
questions?
I just wanted to just step in here just for a second. So guys, you can unmute yourselves and ask a question directly to Barb. So feel free to unmute yourselves. We have taken the mute all button off. So feel free to hop in there and ask questions directly. All right, Barb.
Well, we can always take questions anytime. So I'm so happy to be here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
So Barb, I do actually have one question, and
Yeah.
I'm actually part of the symposium team. So I was off in the sponsors rooms here, but so I apologize if you already mentioned this, but how is the PMP exam now based on the PMBOK 7?
So the PMBOK guide 7th edition at this moment in time has no change, no impact at all on the PMP exam that went into effect. The new version of the PMP exam started January of this year, and it's on its own cycle. So we don't expect an exam change anytime soon. The PMP has already just changed. Now we come along and we have the PMBOK cycle, which is, it's different than the PMP exam updates. Now, eventually the PMP exam will update, and we'll probably see more alignment to some of the vocabulary in the 7th edition. But right now, no change.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thanks.
oh, thank you. And I would say, get the word out, let everybody know, because unfortunately, when we have candidates who are studying for the PMP, it would be a natural assumption to think that I'll read the PMBOK 7, I'll go take the exam, but it's not going to be a proper exam prep to do that.
Got it.
And we want everybody to be successful. So yeah, it's a common question. And I would have thought that too, to be honest, if I wasn't really deep in it and it wasn't my everyday job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the response.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? And I'm also happy to navigate the standards if we have another few minutes. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the time, and we can check those out again if you'd like. Another thing we could do, I'll pull in the standards, and Chantel, you can tell me when we're completely out of time, of course. But let's see if it's going to.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So over here in the standards, and I think it's just going to take a moment to load again. Hopefully it'll pop up for us again. Sometimes I don't know if it doesn't like me moving from screen to screen, or if it just timed out on us quickly again. So over here in the standards, we have the 7th edition. You may have noticed it in the upper page or upper right side of my screen. Nope. Again, it looks like it froze. They might be having some updates going on. It is the weekend after all. But just a little bit more about the digital version of these PMBOK guides. Having the searchable version is so helpful. I don't know how many of you like to have the hard copy of a book. I know I do. I like to have the book in my hand. But more and more, I'm noticing that the word search capabilities that we get with our digital copies is so worth it. And so if you do kind of play around with the PMI Standards Plus and the PMBOK Guide 7th, give it a try. Try out the word search feature. You might actually like that a lot in the downloadable copies. And it's not quite so big a document anymore either. The PMBOK 6th edition, I forget how many megabytes, it was really big, but the 7th edition isn't nearly as big as that older copy. Anybody else have any questions about the PMBOK guide, the PMP? Oh, one more thing that I'll share with you. I know that we're almost up on time, and that is if anybody is ever interested in reviewing a PMI standard, you can earn PDUs by being a reviewer. That's what I did. My name is in the back of the 6th and 7th editions of the PMBOK guide, teeny tiny. And if you are interested, any one of us can do that. We can review, and they call it an exposure draft. You can give feedback to PMI, and you can earn PDUs for your time, and you can also get a sneak peek at what is coming soon. So it's a really worthy way of, spending some time and reading up on project management. All right. And I think.
Well, we've still got some time here, so
Oh, yeah.
a few more moments. So
Sure.
let's see here. If I have some other questions, maybe from the chat, maybe that you didn't cover.
Yeah.
Any idea of the study prep needed for bridging micro credential for previous PMPs?
Yeah, and I never want to steer anybody away from a PMI product. So I just want to be clear about that. There is such a significant switch in not only your mindset, but also the tools to go from the former PMP to now. If you certified anytime prior to, say, 2020, it might not be a bad idea to go ahead and take a course and get the 35 PDUs from the course. Even if you're not interested in sitting again, you can always take the class either from PMI or from an authorized training partner. The bridging is tough because it's an awkward mend. If I look at it like mending 2 quilts or 2 blankets, it's a jagged mend. It doesn't look nice and neat. It's not a clean, it's not like, let me move from the PMBOK 5th to the 6th. Let me learn what went from this last exam to this exam. It's such an overhaul. It would almost be better to kind of clear your mind and just take a new view of project management from the bottom up. And so I'd actually recommend that if you can. But again, the micro credential can't be bad. I'm sure it's going to have some good information in it. And what do I find the least used service from PMI? Oh, I love that PMP individuals don't take advantage of. Wow. Okay. So right now it would be PMI Standards Plus because not many people know about it yet. So I would say that would be a big one. The other one would be that if you navigate through PMI today, where do I lead people and say, oh, you've got to take this? I know what it is. It's the studies they do. So Spotlight on the Profession, I share this all the time. It's the talent gap report. It's a longer name than that, and I'll have to think about what that's called. It's the PMI. It's a talent gap report. They just did it again in 2020. It'll show you growth globally in project management and how we need like 25 million more project managers to be trained. We can't even keep up with the demand. That's a big one. And then the other one would be the salary report that PMI runs. And it's so uplifting to see the salary report between credentialed project managers and non-credentialed and why it's worth it to go ahead and pursue a credential. And then filtered for waterfall and IT. Okay. And so you tried that, William, and maybe didn't get any results. You tried to filter for waterfall. So that's where I would say in that feedback button, let PMI know what you're looking for. They are definitely listening right now to what, oh, good. Okay, you did. Perfect. Yeah, let them know what you need more of. They heard that templates were a gap, so they really are trying hard. Yeah, spotlight on the profession. Thank you for chatting that in. It's called Spotlight on the Profession, Talent Gap Report, and the Salary Report. Both of those are excellent. All right, any last questions? I think we're
All right. Well, thank you, Barb. I think that was our last question. And I want to thank you also for your insightful presentation. I think we all learned a great deal about all of the things that I listed there before. And then also at this time, we like to present you with a certificate of appreciation. And if I can pull it up really quickly, I will definitely share